Well, I'm sorry I'm not able to be with you at QVC, but thank you so much for all your lovely messages. You're so kind. And I thought it would be mouldy if I didn't bring the Saturday story to you. So I'm bringing it to you today from the smallest room in the house. Because actually all our seats and chairs in the home, they're all quite sort of slouchy, and I'm feeling if I'm sitting upright I tend to find it a bit easier to breathe properly. So I've got a great new book for you as well. I'm delighted with this one. I ordered it online and it arrived today by Cecelia Ahern. It's a collection of short stories and it's a story for every woman. The title is Raw, and the chapters, each of these different stories, are called The Woman Who. So for example, The Woman Who Wore Pink, The Woman Who Blew Away, The Woman Who Was Pigeonholed, The Woman Who Smiled, and what I'm going to read for you this evening is The Woman Who Thought the Grass Was Greener on the Other Side. It's a great story, and actually the great thing about it as well is it's told me finally the name of this fantastic bush that smells of coconut that I used to pick with great caution when I was a child because I love the smell of it. So we begin. I hope you're sitting comfortably. The woman stood at the kitchen window of her hillside home on the hot July morning. This spot gave her a wonderful bird's eye view of the glistening, rushing Great Rift Valley River that separated the low hills of the Gorse Mountain Range. It was so named due to the rich yellow pea flowers that lit up the landscape when in full bloom. Despite their beauty, the bush was a mass of prickles and pines to protect them from the harsh winters, but their wonderful coconut aroma more than made up for their thorns. She warmed her hands on a cup of coffee and breathed out happily, contented. And then she glanced at the cottage on the hillside directly across the river, and she felt her body go rigid again and her chest tighten. It was this cottage that tainted her view, and which was the true thorn in the side of the mountain. Behind her, her family were engaged in lively morning conversation while they ate their cereal and debated how to spend their weekend. She tuned them out and reached for her pair of binoculars, which were sitting by the herb flower box on the windowsill. As she held them to her eyes, the scent of rosemary wafted by her nostrils. It had the effect of calming her, which she knew she needed before feasting her eyes on her neighbour. "Don't do it," her husband Tony sang in a warning tone. "She's doing it," her daughter Tina sang in response. "Uh-oh," her son Terry said, ducking to hide behind a cereal box. The woman studied the cottage across the rift and sighed. Tony shoved bacon into his mouth, amused. "What now?" he grinned, crunching on the bacon. "New window boxes? Their apple trees grown bigger than yours?" The children chuckled. "They don't have an apple tree," she grumbled. "Oh well, that's one up for us then," he teased. "We don't have an apple tree," she said. "Then we should get one," he replied good-naturedly. "He got a new car," she said. He stopped chewing the bacon. He stood up and grabbed the binoculars from her. It was his turn to be laughed at by the kids. He looked through the lenses in silence. "Lucky bastard," he finally said. "How can they afford that?" the woman asked. "You'd swear they were in the Hollywood Hills and not some pokey-sized cottage on the worst side of the mountain." "Meow," Tina teased. "You got a promotion," Terry said, peeking up over the cereal box. "I heard yesterday." They left a respectful silence. Tony's bone of contention with his job was that he'd been in the same position for the past 15 years without a promotion. Everybody seemed to be speeding up, overtaking him and leaving him far behind, though the fact that he didn't apply himself seemed to pass him by completely. He felt he deserved his promotion for the years of his life that he'd spent there, and he didn't recognise the need to earn it. "Doesn't bother me," he said, though no one believed him. He handed the binoculars back to his wife. The woman resumed spying on the cottage across the rift. "I think they're getting an extension," she said suddenly. "What makes you think that?" Tony asked, grumpy now. "I can see the builders." "Let me see," he said, taking the binoculars from her. He watched. "That's Bob Sanderson. They'll charge him a fortune, then it'll probably blow down in a storm." "Shouldn't you tell them that?" she asked, pretending that she was concerned but secretly happy to take the wind out of their sails in any way possible. The woman and Tony looked at each other guiltily. "It's none of our business what they do with their lives," he said, sitting down at the table again. They continued eating their breakfast in silence. Tony opened the newspaper. The kids scrolled through their phones, bored. The woman looked towards the window again, and though she couldn't see the cottage from this angle, she was picturing it in her head, imagining them all inside. Smug as can be. Her with her easel and paint, sitting outside most days, being artsy-fartsy. Jake made the swim team, Tina interrupted her mother's thoughts, and she said it directly to her brother, eyes down on her phone. The woman threw her daughter an angry look. Terry sighed. I know. I was there, remember? He'd lost his appetite now. He swirled his cereal around with his spoon, reliving yesterday's heartbreak as they'd huddled around the notice board to read the names who'd made it through. He's probably over there now, running around the garden in his red Speedos just to annoy me. I'd like to see that, said Tina, carrying her bowl to the sink. She couldn't help herself. She picked up the binoculars. She gasped. Is he in his Speedos for real? Terry asked, sitting up. Why the hell is Jacob Kowalski's car in Sally's drive? She shrieked, frightening the cat, who leapt up from where he'd been lazing in the ray of sunlight. Tina! Her dad roared. What's wrong with you? Sorry, she mumbled, slamming the binoculars down. She has a thing for Jacob, the woman said quietly. Tony, surprised at first, then angry, took a moment to process his teenage daughter's human feelings. I'm sure this Jacob guy's a jerk, he said eventually. He's not. Good morning, everybody, the woman's mother, Tabitha, said, arriving into the kitchen in her dressing gown. Morning, Nanny Tabby, Tina said, giving her a hug. She has arisen. We were just about to call the funeral parlour, Tony said, and the woman rolled her eyes. I've been awake since 6 a.m. I was just resting my eyes, Nanny Tabby said, annoyed. I'm going to finish the garden today, darling. What do you think? The rose bush needs seeing to? You did that on Monday. It still needs work. She looked around the table at the miserable bunch. What's wrong with you lot this morning? When she received grunts in response, she narrowed her eyes suspiciously and turned to the kitchen window. Her eyes landed on the binoculars, just as she suspected. Honestly, you've all got to stop this nonsense. She's turned to her daughter. See what you're encouraging. This spying is ridiculous. It does nothing but leave you all miserable and unappreciative of what you have. It's not spying, the woman defended herself, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Anyway, it's impossible not to look. They're always pushing everything in our face. What are we supposed to do? Nanny Tabby frowned. Their neighbour was hardly pushing anything in their face, across the river on the side of another mountain. You all need to remember how fortunate you are, to have each other, to have this wonderful home. Remember all your blessings. You need to stop comparing your lives with those of others, especially them. It's outrageous, and it's eating you all up on the inside, rotting your hearts, causing arguments and upset. They lowered their heads in shame. Mark my word, they're probably looking over here and thinking the very same thing as you are. The grass is always greener on the other side, she said, moving towards the teapot. Their grass does look greener, Tina said, pouting. Granny Tabby laughed. It's just an expression, dear. Seriously, have none of you noticed? Tina asked, looking around. Their grass is greener. They all scrambled to their feet and they hurried to the window, Granny Tabby included. Suddenly, what she had never noticed before became glaringly obvious. They didn't need the binoculars to see that the grass on the acres surrounding the cottage was far greener than any other patch on the mountain. They bundled outside to the garden. Maybe we get more sun, Tony said, squinting as he looked up to examine the light. Our grass is scorched from the sun. The sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. We both get the same sun, Granny Tabby snapped viciously, in a tone none of them had ever heard her use before. I'm out in the garden every day tending to it. I water it every week. The grass can't be greener. It's impossible. Her voice rose. They began arguing among themselves, and the row continued until they stormed off in different directions, taking their anger, their jealousy and rage with them, until they compared themselves to everyone, until they were holding themselves up against everybody else in the world, barometers of what other people had versus what they didn't have. Across Rift Valley, the woman noticed the entire family come out of their house and onto the lawn. She heard them bickering, even from here, the wind carrying their hateful words across to her. She quickly ducked down behind a gorse bush and spied as they stared across the river in her direction, faces twisted with displeasure, hands on their hips, and hands lifted to their foreheads like visors. She felt like a child playing hide and seek. Her chest heaved up and down as her heart pounded nervously. She giggled, and then she blocked her mouth with her gloved hand to stifle the sound, knowing that they couldn't possibly hear her from all the way over there, but afraid anyway. Ever since the day she and her family had developed the dilapidated cottage and moved in, she had seen their faces pushed up against the window, binoculars to their eyes. Her husband had discovered them when he was surveying the spectacular view with his binoculars, and they knew they were being watched all through the construction to the day that they'd moved in. Every single morning since, she'd felt their eyes on her. She'd felt uncomfortable in her new home for a long time, but she had more important things to worry about in her life. The money they'd sunk into developing the derelict cottage, her son's chronic asthma that they'd used swimming to help him overcome, her daughter's heartbreak at leaving her first love behind, hearing her daughter cry herself to sleep, up until recently when she'd met the sweet Jacob boy who'd come by that morning. Then there was her husband's recent promotion, which kept him away longer than anticipated, leaving her alone here on the side of the mountain. It was good for him, even though he was exhausted, and it meant she had more time to spend on her paintings. But they were more difficult to sell here, and half of them had been destroyed by the leak from their bath that the builders had been out to check that morning. She had borrowed her sister's car while she was away on holiday, just so she wouldn't feel so isolated, so that she could come and go as she pleased. It was painting that always helped her to escape, and it was when she was painting one morning, out in the garden, captivated by the bright yellow gorse against the green, that had given her the big idea. She was tired of her neighbours staring, their judgmental eyes on her and her family, startled by their irrational jealousy and constant comparison of their lives to hers. And so she'd sent out a message of her own. The pack on her back was heavy and it weighed her down. She wore a face mask, goggles, heavy gloves and protective clothing, so they probably wouldn't even have recognised her if she hadn't have dived behind a bush when they gathered up on their lawn. She had risen early with the birds, and she spent the morning walking across the acres around her home, taking her time to spray her land with 2 coats. She had nothing to lie about to her family when they returned. She had been painting, perhaps just not the canvas as they knew it. All it had taken was Epsom salt for magnesium, fertiliser, green food colouring, water and a spray wand to make a healthy green paint. She liked her life. She did her best to remedy her problems and count her blessings. She didn't care what went on behind her neighbours' walls, but she did enjoy this one task. No matter what they thought of her, her actions, her words, the way that she composed herself meant that her grass would always be greener on her side of the rift. Isn't that lovely? That's great. I think we've got a real gem in this book. Once again, thank you very much for all your lovely messages, and please do keep in touch with me, and I shall see you next Saturday for another short story. But I'm on the blog, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, I'm there. Keep in touch and stay well.